Welcome into the Jazz Notes podcast. I'm Ben Anderson.
I'm Chandler Holt.
We are recording this on Monday, January 27th, our last podcast of the month. Appreciate everyone who tunes in. You can find us on Twitter at Ben's Hoops. You can find us at C Holt Sports. Read us at KSLSports.com. Should also mention we're on Instagram, Blue Sky, wherever you want to get your social media. You can find us there. We wrap up every show with a mailbag, and I send out a prompt on Mondays at about 11 today. I did it at 11:30, asking for your Utah Jazz and NBA questions. I do it on Twitter and on Blue Sky, and you can respond there and make sure you get your questions addressed. But we like to start out with weekly news. We'll preview the upcoming week. We'll check in with the standings of the NBA and other news and notes, and then get to that mailbag. So, Chandler, let's start with some weekly news for the Jazz.
Yeah, basically right after we filmed our podcast last week, the Jazz made their first trade of the year. Although it involved no players and a bunch of picks, they traded 3 firsts for an unprotected 2031 Phoenix Suns first-round pick. The picks that the Jazz sent were the least favorable in 2025 of Cleveland and Minnesota, least favorable in 2027 of Cleveland, Minnesota, and Utah, and then least favorable again in 2029 of those 3 teams.
So what this read to me is, hey, you know what? If you were to take any sample of 3 teams, just like randomly pick 3 NBA team names out of a hat. In fact, we probably could have done this.
Yeah.
The odds of one of those teams having a pick in the 20s that year is really high.
Really high.
Right? Like some team is randomly going to be one of the 10 best teams in the NBA. Now, there is a chance that you could pick out the Jazz, the Raptors, and the Wizards. And they end up with 3 of the top 5 picks, and you say, man, that really stinks. That really hurts. But there is actually more informed predictability on this than there would be just picking a name out of a hat, which is we already know the pick this year that's going to go to Phoenix is going to be the 30th or the 29th pick because it's going to be from Cleveland, and they have the second best record in the NBA now. They're on a 3-game losing streak, and even then you're giving up like the 29th pick.
Yeah.
Jazz don't need another 29th pick. Like you've got those guys. They've got a lot of young guys. So they were fine getting rid of this year's pick. In fact, it just makes their life easier. They don't have to. And I will tell you some conversations I had with people off the record. I'll bring them on the record, which is totally inappropriate, but it's not really what I'm doing. Basically, one of the things the Jazz wanted to know this year was who of the young guys on the team are good enough to stick around and who's going to be replaced with the upcoming draft.
Yeah.
Which I think still applies, but like you can say, oh, well, actually Isaiah's okay. And like the odds, as flawed as Keontae George might be, and I know we'll talk about him because he's been moved to the bench here, it's like the odds of the 29th pick in this year's draft being better than Keontae George are so slim. You know, it's really small. Keontae still could do a lot of things really well. So it's like probably not even going to be better than Kyle Filipowski or Isaiah Collier, so you don't need that pick. So kick that asset down the road and don't wait until draft night to do it, because when you wait till draft night to do it, maybe it doesn't materialize. Or maybe you're saying like, oh, we passed on a deal that we thought was good enough and we hoped that somebody would offer something better and they just never did, so now we're in trouble. So they don't wait for that. They get rid of this year's draft. Well, if Cleveland's good today, all of these guys are still on their roster in 2027. Literally every player right now that is making them good, Jared Allen, Evan Mobley, Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, is under contract for the next 2 years. So they're probably going to be pretty good in 2027 too. And you say, fine. So that's going to be a pick in the 20s, like a very high likelihood. Now things fall apart. Philly, no one expected them to be a lottery pick this year, and they might be, but probably a relatively safe bet that pick's in the 20s, not just the 20s, the mid to late 20s.
Yep.
Okay. So you've given up 2 late 20s for a future lottery pick, maybe, from the Suns, or at least a chance at the lottery pick. And then, yes, we don't know what 2029 is going to look like from the Jazz, the Jazz, the Timberwolves, and the Cavaliers. But I bet you the Jazz think, by 2029, we might be pretty good. We control our pick, actually. So if we don't want to give them a good pick, let's just have a good roster.
Yep.
We'll give them our pick, and then we'll take whatever. That's great, because if our pick's the worst pick, that means we're better than both the Timberwolves and the Cavaliers. That's great for us. So I think that's how the Jazz are looking at it. Like, there is not a lot of situations where at least 2 of these picks aren't in the 20s, and then I think there's a high likelihood that one of them's at least late teens, if not 20s. And then you've given up 3 picks in the 20s, or a 1 in the late teens and 2 in the 20s. For a chance, as Justin Zanuck, I thought, put it very appropriately, might be the number 1 overall pick.
Yeah.
We don't know. Probably won't be, but has a chance to be. And truly, none of the other 3 have an even chance to be, because if they were the 3rd worst, they can't be number 1. The best they could be is 3rd overall.
When you look at teams in the NBA with, I don't want to say maybe the worst, but the most questionable futures, the Phoenix Suns are in that top 5. Their best player is Kevin Durant, who is on the verge of retirement.
36.
Devin Booker, they put a competitive roster around him, and they had that run to the finals a few years ago, but who knows if he'll still be in town, especially when 2031 comes around, because he'll also be into his 30s.
6 years from now, so far in the
exactly.
NBA.
But also, I saw a lot of Jazz fans upset with this trade and basically saying nothing more than 3 picks for 1, which that's really not what it is, because a lot of those same fans were probably the ones who were upset with the Jazz making all 3 selections in the past 2 drafts.
Right. Or not tanking hard enough to get high picks.
Yes,
it's
exactly.
Like there's odds are this is going to be a higher pick than any of the ones that the Jazz make. To your point, the way you have to rebuild in the NBA is you have to drop to the bottom and you have to draft players to become good. And you have to use your own picks to do it. It's really hard to bet on other teams to do it unless you're getting this pick right now from the Suns, which is they don't have any of their own picks to rebuild with. If they're bad, all of their picks that they do own, 2026, 2028, 2030, go to the Washington Wizards because they have swap rights. So you're just never going to have a great pick in this situation. Now, maybe they have the 8th pick and the Wizards have the 3rd pick and the Wizards, or the vice versa, and they swap. Okay, maybe. But then again, like you're drafting the 8th pick. The Suns are trying to build their roster with a bunch of Taylor Hendrickses as their best players, or Cody Williams as their best player, and Jazz fans, like imagine if those were your only 2 guys right now. Like, pretty rough.
Yeah.
It's pretty rough. So they are in a bad spot. Cleveland is going to be in a very bad spot. They have, I will... what can I buy a hamburger today? I'll pay you tomorrow. Whatever that saying is, it's like that's what they're doing. They are mortgaging their future. I'd gladly pay you tomorrow for a hamburger today. That's what they're doing. They are mortgaging their future to win now, and the Jazz are saying, "Fine, we'll short your future. We think you're going to be really bad." And then the odds that the Jazz ever even actually make this pick are relatively low.
Yes,
right. You include this. This is the type of pick that when you're trading for Giannis Antetokounmpo in 2 years, you're like, you don't want 3 late firsts. You don't want a 29th overall pick, but you do want a potential number 3 overall pick, plus some young players and a big salary. That's how I saw this. That's how I read this. So I think that made sense. There's also some other little bits and pieces of the trade that I thought probably influenced the Jazz in this. Like Taylor Hendricks is basically going into his sophomore year next year.
Yep.
Cody Williams clearly needs a lot of development next year. So you've already got 2 guys who are going to need a lot of time, who are essentially only playing their sophomore years, in Cody and Taylor, not to mention whoever you draft with the top 5 pick. And maybe another pick in the teens. Like, there is so much youth on this team next year, it's crazy. You didn't need to add a 3rd. And honestly, you just would have wasted it because you didn't have enough opportunity to develop that guy, even if you put him in the G League. And he probably wasn't going to be thrilled at that. So you're going to take some overseas gamble and hope that the guy turned into something and may not come over for 4 years, which, by the way, you already have in Gabriel Procida, who you got in the Simone Fontecchio trade. It's like, you got young guys.
Yeah.
Fine. Move on. You'll be fine. And you know what? You can trade this for 3 first-round picks.
Yeah.
Apparently. Like, if you end up wanting more picks, you could just trade this for 3 firsts, because that's what the Suns just did. Yep. So it keeps your trade assets window alive even further down the road.
This trade was clearly a gamble for both sides, but in my view, the Suns have so much more to lose than the Jazz do. Like, worst case scenario, the Jazz get rid of like a 17th overall pick and then 2 picks in the 20s compared to losing a 3rd from the Suns. So,
and I like it for Phoenix because I don't think Phoenix is like one player away that they're trying to get with this number 1 or this future 2031 unprotected pick. Like, as soon as they did this, I thought, oh, the Jazz should have done this when they had Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert. Right? When the Jazz were like, we don't have any wiggle room, we don't have draft picks, we can't get better. It's like, oh, you should have traded a future unprotected pick. Now you're glad they didn't because like the Jazz need all their picks that they can have. But like, imagine if they traded the 2027 pick in 2021 or whatever unprotected for 3 firsts and said like, well, we're going to use those to try and go out and do what Toronto did last year, which was trade a first for Ochai Agbaji and Kelly Olynyk.
Yeah,
like good for the Jazz. They don't need veterans on their team, but the 2021 Jazz did need Kelly Olynyk and Ochai Agbaji. Like that's exactly what they needed. That would have been a great trade. So I actually kind of like it for Phoenix in that sense, but it doesn't have any impact on the type of team they're going to be in 2031. Their window is so short. So, no, I think this was a smart trade actually for both teams. I think it is going to benefit the Jazz.
All right, 2 more quick pieces of news. First, Isaiah Thomas is pursuing another NBA return. He's going to rejoin the Salt Lake City Stars. And then for the main Jazz roster, Jordan Clarkson finally returning from injury tonight against Milwaukee.
Cool to see Jordan back. Yes. I'm a fan of Jordan Clarkson, the person. He's a very nice guy. He really just messed up his foot. And it's a guy who's playing on a team that's not playing for anything, who is later in his career, wants to win a title, and he's like still risking his body. Like that's a thing you should applaud, in all honesty. So excited to see Jordan tonight. And whatever, Isaiah Thomas, cool.
Yeah.
Whatever.
All right, we can talk about the last week of games, preview the next week, then we'll take a break and get into the mailbag. But For the last week, just 2 games. First, a loss to Oklahoma City, 123-114, and then a loss to Memphis, 125-103. John Collins returned in that OKC game and looked great.
But did not play against Memphis.
Yes.
Is not playing tonight.
Yep.
I think the Jazz wanted to say, like, look, he still got it, and he did. And then they're like, all right, and then we will maybe see you before the trade deadline, or maybe we won't.
Yeah.
I don't know, because he's got an illness now. There is a thing going around the NBA, like half the league is sick right now.
Yeah.
So John Collins not playing. But I do think that was hey, Sacramento Kings, he's fine. The hip thing, we know what that was. Like, he can still play. So if you want to give us a first-round pick for him, we'll do it. That's the Jazz's perspective is my guess there. But, man, the Memphis game was ugly. That was one of the worst games they've played in a really long time. Yep. Jazz aren't getting blown out a lot. Like, they've had a couple of double-digit losses, but they've had way more single-digit losses than double-digit losses over the last 50 days. So to have that type of game, it felt like maybe a turn in the season to me of, like, these guys realize, like, this is going to be a long final 38 games of the season or whatever it is left. They're going to lose most of them. It's going to be the young guys playing. The trade deadline is very quickly approaching, and it's going to get ugly quick. So we'll see. They play Milwaukee tonight. Here's the upcoming week. I'll steal your bit. Host Milwaukee tonight, tomorrow at Golden State, and then back home for Minnesota and Orlando. We predicted a winless week last week because they also had the Wizards game postponed. We think over?
I think
you can beat Orlando, but Paolo's back,
Paolo's back, yeah. And, like, the only game is, like, Golden State has not looked good recently, but that's in Golden State.
On the second night of a back-to-back.
Yeah, and I don't think the Jazz are getting that one. So, yeah, I think it's probably another 0-4 week.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, if you really want to get into, like, the nuance and details of, like, what would be best for the Jazz, probably every loss. But if you could beat Minnesota and lose to Golden State, like, you would love for Minnesota to miss the playoffs. And they are closer to the 13th seed, which I actually think is the 11th seed. Excuse me. They're closer to the 11th seed, which I think is Golden State right now. I'd have to pull up the standings. Then they're as close to being out of the playoffs as they are to having a guaranteed playoff spot.
Yeah.
They are 2 games back of a guaranteed playoff spot, which is number 6, and 2 games back of the 11th seed, which is, I think, the Warriors.
It is.
So the more losses Minnesota gets, the better, and the more the teams behind them, which is Phoenix, Golden State. Who else is in there? Who's at number 10?
Number 10 is the Sacramento Kings.
Okay, and the Kings they could potentially jump Minnesota and keep them out of playoffs, could get you another lottery pick. There's some benefit there.
Yep.
So if you had to win one, I guess beat Minnesota.
Yeah.
But I don't think the Jazz are going to win a game this week. So over.
Yes.
All right, let's take a break. We'll come back. We'll do our standings update. We will look at what the Jazz opponents are going up against, and opponents meaning in the tanking rankings. We'll see who plays who coming up this week, and then we will get to your mailbag questions. Stick around. More Jazz Notes coming up next. Welcome back to the Jazz Notes podcast. All right, Chandler, get us updated on where the Jazz sit in the standings.
Right now, after an 0-2 week, the Jazz hold a 10-33 record, 15th in the West, 29th overall, still 4.5 games back from the Wizards. Like you've talked about, all that matters is the wins. All these teams are going to be losing games. Washington has 6 wins. The Pelicans and the Hornets both have 12 wins, 2 more than the Jazz. Toronto has 13 now, and Brooklyn has 14. Upcoming games for the Pelicans. In Toronto, home against Dallas, home against Boston. Charlotte has a home game against the Lakers, and then against the Nets, Clippers, and Nuggets. All of those games are at home, actually. And then for the Raptors, home against the Pelicans, in Washington, home against Chicago, home against the Clippers.
And Brooklyn has Sacramento, at Charlotte, at Houston. So the big games to look at there, we can just quickly identify them. New Orleans at Toronto tonight. That's a win for the Jazz. One of those teams has to win. Toronto's actually playing really good. They've won 3 in a row. Pelicans, they've really started to tank. You know, I know Zion's back, and they're trying to build his value up, but DeJounte Murray's out of the lineup again, so they're pretty bad or they're pretty beat up. I thought they were going to play better. But, I bet you the Raptors win this game. And they could even beat Dallas coming up. The Pelicans could maybe beat Dallas because Dallas is still hurt and now is missing Derek Lively. So there's a chance for the Pelicans to get a win there. Charlotte, I don't think they beat the Lakers. Lakers are playing good lately. Probably do beat Brooklyn and then go winless the rest of the week. So they'll pick up a win. Toronto has a chance to win a couple of games in a row, maybe even 3 in a row.
Yeah.
They host the Pelicans, like you mentioned, at Washington, who's lost 13 straight, and then home against Chicago. Chicago is gearing up, I think, to lose games because I think they've got the 10th or 11th worst record in the NBA. Their pick is top 10 protected.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it goes to San Antonio. So I think even they and Jerry Reinsdorf understands, you got to get this draft pick. You
Yes.
don't want to give Victor Wembanyama another free lottery pick. They're going to have their own because I think the Spurs are going to miss the playoffs, but they're going to have their own pick. You don't need to give them yours. And then Brooklyn, Sacramento at Charlotte at Houston. Houston's good, Sacramento's good, but maybe at Charlotte they pick up a win. But so there's a chance every single one of these teams wins a game. At the very least, we know Charlotte or Brooklyn will win one because they play each other, and New Orleans and Toronto play each other. So if the Jazz go winless, they will be another game back at least of every single one of these teams, and that pushes everyone else up into that 13-14 range, and the Jazz, I think, are going to hold firm at 10. So, I thought it was crazy a week ago we were talking about this, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, like where we thought the Jazz would finish. I thought the Jazz would have the fourth worst record. You said third. I thought you were being too ambitious. I think that's going to be second.
Yeah.
I really think they have put themselves now in a good spot to end up with the second worst record in the NBA at the end of the season, which really will put them in a spot to win, win the lottery.
Mm-hmm. Other than the Charlotte Bobcats, who didn't play a full
Hornets.
season.
The Bobcats.
Yes,
The Bobcats, yeah.
Back in 2012. In the modern era, the worst record is the 1676ers, who went 10-72. Are the Wizards going to win like 10 games this year?
Do they win 4 more?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Which is crazy to think.
Yeah, probably not. That's tough. I said, and I will pat myself on the back for this, I told you we were counting wins for the rest of the year for the Jazz, and I said it was 6.
Yeah.
I said they were going to win one of these games. I think it was Brooklyn, and then I didn't think they were going to win again. Or maybe it was even the weekend going into the 2 against New Orleans, and then they had a Charlotte, and they lost all 3. But I think I remember going into that saying, the Jazz are going to win 6 games the rest of the year, and that's looking accurate.
Yeah.
16 wins probably is right around where the Jazz will finish. They're certainly not getting to 20.
Yep. 16 wins would be one of the 40 worst records in NBA history. 15 moves you into the top 20 worst records in NBA history.
Yeah. So it's going to get ugly.
Yeah.
We will see. Enjoy every little win you can, because they're not going to matter that much because other teams are showing they can win more. All right. Mailbag?
Yep,
let's do it. As always, find me on Twitter at Ben's Hoops. Find Chandler at Holt Sports. I tweet this out and put it on Blue Sky at about 11:30 every Monday or whenever we're recording. It's usually Mondays. Occasionally it's Tuesdays if there's a holiday. But and then you can send in your questions. We'll just start with Blue Sky because that's the most recent ones we've got.
Yeah. First up from Alex. Other than Cooper Flagg, who do you think Ainge and Zanuck would be most interested in targeting in the draft?
And the nice thing is, it's positionless.
Yes.
Just take whoever.
Yeah.
So Dylan Harper, I think, would be number 2. He has established himself, I think, as the second best player. I think there's a chance Ace Bailey still makes a run at this thing. Ace is very flawed. Mm-hmm. He's the best shot maker in the draft.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy how weird his game is to watch, because he's a little bit like a baby giraffe. I mean, he's tall. He's 6'10". He likes to dribble. He's averaging 20 points, essentially, 8 rebounds. He's shooting 47% from the floor, 39% from 3. And you watch the shots he takes. He's like, dude, no. Okay. Wow, what a shot. Nice. You really made that. It's like, how did you take that shot?
Yeah.
Why did you take that shot? And they go in so often. And look, the NBA is about shot makers. It just is. And worst case scenario, if he doesn't work out, he's 6'10". He's a great shooter. It's like he's Jabari Smith.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario. Best case, or Lowry Markkanen. But best case scenario is he's a 6'10" T-Mac. I don't know. He can put the ball on the floor. He can do some other things. Again, not a great passer. His teammates outside of Dylan Harper are trash. It's a horrible team at Rutgers. I have watched a couple of their games, and it's amazing the lack of talent. And look, some of that is his fault. They're not playing a system to get everyone involved. They paid Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper a bunch of money to go and play at Rutgers, and those guys know it, and they take all the shots as a result. But you go down and look at his box score, he doesn't have stinkers. He had one game where he scored 9 points on 3 of 16 shooting, but he always scores more than he shoots. And for a freshman, it's pretty rare.
Yeah.
Usually those guys have really up and down bad games. He just really doesn't. He's already got a couple of 30-point games this year. So while I think Dylan Harper is a pretty safe bet to go number 2, I just don't think that's locked in yet.
Mm-hmm.
I think there could be a team that says, man, 6'10", shot the lights out in our workout. I think that's our guy, and I could see that happening. Again, 2 games ago against Penn State, which is a real opponent, he was 13 of 15 from the floor. He's a 6'10" freshman.
Yeah.
He had 30 points and 7 rebounds. Yeah, that dude cooks. And yeah, the next night he was 4 of 17 against Michigan State. Michigan State's good. Dylan Harper was coming off the bench in that game. He still had 18 points in that game, meaning he gets to the free throw line a ton. He's flawed, but his strengths are crazy. 6'10" and shooting like that as a freshman is pretty dang awesome. So those are the 2 guys I'd say.
And that's the thing is he might come into the league at 6'9", 6'10", as, a 20-year-old?
Yeah.
And then he can maybe be like Kevin Durant, eventually become a 7-footer, and he can shoot the lights out. I don't think that's a bad pick at all. Next Blue Sky question from Sammy Paradise. I think David Locke had this idea originally, but could you see the NBA switching to 8 different divisions when Vegas and Seattle are added in an attempt to create more rivalries?
I don't think the league cares about rivalries.
Yeah.
I don't think the league cares about forcing geographical rivalries.
Yep.
They just don't. I mean, they haven't. When was the last time they tried to? You know what I mean? Like, what are, like Christmas Day games, who plays? It's not the Knicks and the Nets. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's who's good. And that's all that matters. Who's good? The Memphis Grizzlies had a thing with the Lakers because Dylan Brooks wanted to fight LeBron James.
Yeah.
And a thing with the Warriors because Dylan Brooks also wanted to fight the Warriors. And Draymond Green wanted to fight him back.
Yeah.
For a while, Cleveland and Golden State had a great rivalry. Right now, Boston and Denver have kind of a fun rivalry. Like, you're not going to force rivalries.
Yep.
Great players make great rivalries. That's where the NBA is. It's not baseball. You know, the Cubs and the White Sox, it still matters when they play. They're both terrible teams. White Sox are awful. But it's a big deal to the White Sox when they play. You can't fake that, I don't think, in basketball. And I don't, basketball rivalries, it's like, even then, it's like, who's the most famous basketball rivalry of all time when it comes to teams?
Boston and the Lakers.
Yeah. They play twice a year.
Yeah.
Like, they'll play 20 times a century unless they are in the finals.
Yep.
Like the finals, not the playoffs, the finals. They have to play in the finals to play each other more than that.
Yep.
So, yeah, no, it's not a big deal. Like, so I don't buy that.
Yes.
In all honesty, I'm not buying geographic rivalries at all.
Yeah, I don't think that's a thing in basketball. In terms of the different divisions, I don't know exactly about that, but I assume that Memphis and maybe Minnesota would get moved to the East if those two teams are added in expansion, and then they would join the Western Conference.
New Orleans could be in that conversation too.
Yes.
But yeah, some of those teams will jump over. But yeah, maybe they change. I don't know.
Yeah.
Again, I just don't think it really. I don't think the divisional rivalries really matter.
Yeah. All right, moving over to the extra replies now. First up from Jeremy Fairbanks. Any idea if the new City Edition jersey coming in October will be sky blue?
Honestly, I've not caught up with the jerseys, but so the Jazz have their white jersey.
Yep.
This purple jersey will survive until next year, I think. And then they have their black jersey that they just started wearing. So I think those are their 3 jerseys next year. I could be totally wrong.
Do they not have a second purple jersey?
I don't think they do.
Okay.
So I apologize. Honestly, I'm not up on the latest jersey talk for the Utah Jazz. Certainly, they are putting sky blue out there.
Yes.
And I think a sky blue jersey will be coming. Is it next year? I haven't seen it. I haven't heard about it. I know I was early on some of the jersey stuff last year. I will do my best. Again, when I get a sense of how to gather stuff, I will let you know. But I haven't yet with what anything is going on next year, other than they'll debut the white jersey, and the black jersey is for sure going to be there.
Next up from Utah Jazz Optimist, the Great Bambus. How likely do you think it is that the Jazz don't tank next year and end up sending their pick to OKC?
I think it's totally up in the air.
Yeah.
More likely than not, they are holding on to their pick, I would say. But they are going to be opportunistic. If a trade comes along this offseason, like if the Bucks lose in the first round again, 3 straight years, they say, man, we want to start over. We want to start over. And we don't want to do 5 years of tanking. How do we get a bunch of picks quickly? The Jazz will say, well, you're not getting this year's first round pick. Like, you're not getting the Jazz's pick. I don't think the Jazz would ever trade that unless it falls to like 5. And then they're like, yeah, let's stop doing this tanking thing. This stinks. But if the Jazz get a top 3 or 4 pick, I don't think that thing gets traded at all. The Jazz will say, well, we'll hold on to that one. You pick whatever else you want, and then we'll put together Giannis and Cooper Flagg or Giannis and Dylan Harper, and we'll roll our dice with that. And, we'd like to keep Walker.
Yeah.
Or what, you know what I mean? Like, here's the 5 guys. Pick 3 of them.
Yep.
And then here's 4 draft picks. Take those. These are the 4 you can have. And we're going to keep 3 of our guys and our number 1 overall pick or whatever, and you give us Giannis, and that's what we're rebuilding with.
Yeah.
Okay, and then, you give up your pick next year, like whatever. And by the way, like, who cares at that point? And you're probably good enough where it does get conveyed to OKC. But otherwise, no, I don't think the Jazz are like building specifically to hold on to next year's pick.
Yeah.
I don't think they operate with that in mind. Now, that doesn't mean they ignore it and act recklessly and accidentally give the Thunder the 9th pick because next year it's only top 8 protected. I think if the Jazz are in that spot, they're going to tank like hell late in the year to make sure that they don't give up the 9th pick to the Thunder. But I don't think they go into this season like, we got to be one of the 7 worst teams in the NBA, or go into the summer thinking that for next year.
I could see, of course, it is entirely dependent on what happens in the draft and in free agency. But I could sort of see it being like the Jazz from 2 years ago now, I think it is. Like they go in with a decent roster and they just let them play, but then they sort of analyze midseason and then maybe pick a direction midseason or at the trade deadline.
Yeah, but you know what? If Houston comes along and says, well, here's Reed Shepherd and Jabari Smith and contracts and 3 first-round picks for Lauri Markkanen, I think the Jazz probably say, okay,
Yeah.
like deal, fine. That works for us. That's good enough for us, and we'll be bad next year.
Yeah.
Like, and then you add Jabari Smith and Reed Shepherd as like guys who another team had to tank and get 2 top 3 picks for. Houston didn't tank to get Reed Shepherd. I think that was with somebody else's pick.
Yeah.
But yeah, regardless, you know what I mean? Like, fine, great. That's how you hope you get. You know, the next Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is one of those guys is just waiting to break out. You hope that Jabari Smith Jr. is Lauri Markkanen, but just hasn't had the opportunity yet the same way Lauri didn't in Chicago or Cleveland, and then breaks out when he's really given the green light in Utah. So, you know, I could see something like that. Absolutely, I could see something like that happening for the Jazz. So I don't think they are going in with a hardened plan of what next year's got to look like.
Next up from Tiefers, Lakers repeatedly asking for Walker, but the price is too high. What is the Jazz's asking price for Walker right now? Assuming they don't trade him unless they're blown away, what is the deal that blows them away?
So really basic economics is that supply and demand, right? Yeah. Like there's a huge demand for Walker Kessler. I told you, I think I said this on the air already, that I've heard the Jazz have hung up on 20 different teams asking for Walker.
Wow.
Like 20 teams.
Yeah.
Well, okay, imagine how good the offers have to be because somebody has to have the best offer of 20. Now, a lot of teams can offer similar things, second-round draft picks, one first on a player, whatever. The Jazz have had 20 offers and rebuffed them all.
Yeah.
Apparently, is what I've heard. So if they're turning down 20 offers, they got to be pretty good offers at that point. Someone's going to try and blow you away, whether that's 2 firsts or whatever. Like I would be shocked if there wasn't an offer for Walker of 2 firsts. Now, is that 2 unprotected firsts? Probably not. Mm-hmm. But you know, are the Lakers offering to take their protections off the 2027 pick and then another top 10 protected pick later? Like I could see that, I guess. And the Jazz are just like, no, Walker's probably the starting center for the next 5 years, 6 years. And still has some upside. He's kind of continues to flash that maybe he can shoot the ball, and his passing's way better than it's ever been before. And, you know, his focus is great. So I don't think anyone's going to offer anything crazy. And the hard part for Walker is he makes $3 million a year.
Yeah.
You know, so you can't do a 1-for-1. It's Walker plus whatever to get a good player back. So, like, was it Austin Reeves and a first for Walker Kessler and, you know, Jordan Clarkson to make the salaries work? Or, yeah, maybe. I honestly have no idea. But it could be something like that.
Yeah.
And then the Jazz are like, no, we don't want to take back that money or whatever. So I don't know what the offer is to blow the Jazz away. But if you gave him like a good young lottery pick, or a good young player who was drafted in the lottery, and then 2 other lottery picks, like in the future, I bet they would consider that.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Another one from Tiefers. Any different vibes after Keontae got benched for Collier? Do you expect him back in the starting lineup soon, maybe after the deadline?
Certainly maybe after the deadline, and maybe before. Maybe he starts tonight. Yeah. Like, I do think, obviously, I think the Jazz want Keontae to focus more on the defensive end. I didn't think he responded very well in Memphis at all. He had a really bad game, his worst game in a while. He did try harder, but he shot really poorly, and the starting lineup was bad. One thing I like about Keontae is his assists are way up recently. Like, even that game, he came off the bench, I think he had 7 assists and only 1 turnover. So he continues to do a lot of things a lot better than he did as a rookie. And I think he's moving in the right direction. I just think the Jazz probably need to overcorrect a little bit with him because they gave him such a green light so early on, and they probably just gave him enough rope that he doesn't play as hard as he could.
Yeah.
And it's clear he doesn't. Like, he doesn't play as hard as he could. He doesn't run as hard as he could. I was amazed the other night watching the Memphis game. It's like the Jazz were down 25 or whatever it was in the 4th quarter, and like Walker sprinted to a closeout in the corner. I was like, wow, like Jazz aren't going to win this game. Walker easily could have just posted up under the rim, waited to get the rebound, or take the ball out. Like, but he sprinted to the corner to try and block a shot. And I thought, okay, that's really good effort. Like, that's a winning habit, actually, if you're trying to develop. And I'm not sure that's the effort Keontae's putting in.
Yeah.
And his focus off the ball is pretty bad defensively. So if they're trying to send that message, I get it. And maybe, you know, we've tried to figure this out. Like, what is Keontae's ideal position? Because he's probably too small to be a 2 guard. So if he's going to be your 2, and I don't think he's like a natural point guard. I believe you need to have like a real point guard. So he and Collier are way too small in the backcourt to be like good long term, I think. So you either have to have a huge point guard and then play him next to Keontae, Or Keontae maybe has to assume like a Jordan Clarkson type role and be just kind of a little bit of a do-it-all guard off the bench, which might be a really good role for him, but I bet you Keontae's not thinking like, yeah, I'm a bench player.
Yeah.
After what's been going on for him. So I think that's delicate. I have not heard from Will Hardy. We will talk to him tonight about what that decision was. He did not, at least on the television broadcast, I did not hear him address it when he was in Memphis. So tonight I think we'll get a clearer look at that. I also I'm not reading into everything. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's fair to read into what we just said, and I think those things are accurate. But also, like, the Jazz are 10-33. You know what I mean? Like, they might just be trying to showcase Svi Mikhailiuk. And so they say, well, we'll put Svi in at the 3, but we like the way Svi plays better next to Collins, so Collins got to be in the starting lineup, but Collins playing better next to Isaiah. Or maybe Svi looks better next to Isaiah because Isaiah gets him the ball coming off screens. Like, it could be something as simple as that.
Yeah.
And the Jazz are just like, yeah, okay, so let's see how Keontae looks off the bench. Like, we got nothing to lose. Keontae's under contract for a while, so let's see how that works. I just wouldn't. Not every decision Will Hardy makes right now is like a long-term lasting decision.
Yeah. You already answered this a bit. Tiefer's also asked why is Fee starting games, and I think more or less it's to showcase what he can do.
Yeah, I pulled this up during my radio show, so I'm sorry if you listened to the show and then are listening to this. So over his last 11 games, which is really over like a 17 or 18 game period, he has scored in double digits in all but 2 of them. And one of them is because I think he hardly played. No, he played 15 minutes against the Knicks. He took 6 shots. He missed them all. So he just had a normal bad shooting night. Yeah. So his last 11 appearances, he has started 6 of the games. Mm-hmm. He's averaging 22 minutes, which is how you showcase a guy who is not in the rotation every night. He's averaging 13 points, 2.5 rebounds, 2 assists, and he's shooting 37% from 3 on 7.5 attempts. Like, that's a guy who you're saying, look, you need the best shooter available in the trade market that's not named Cam Johnson?
Yeah.
Here he is. He's Svi Mikhailiuk. He makes $3 million a year. You can have him for a second-round draft pick. Like, but it's got to be like the 34th pick, the 35th pick. It's not the 55th pick. That doesn't do the Jazz any good. But it's like, so trade him for the 35th pick for some team who has the top or who's, close to competing for the playoffs or close to competing for a title and says, we could use one more shooter. And we randomly have this other second-round pick from somebody because it got traded to us 5 years ago, and we're not going to make it because a young guy's not going to do anything for us, but we could use Svi.
Yeah.
Like, that's exactly what you're looking for in this type of trade. And then you say, yeah, you gave up the 30th pick or the 29th pick in this Suns trade that we talked about earlier, and you get the 35th pick back for Svi Mikhailiuk. It's like, it's the same pick.
Yeah.
29th and 35th are nearly identical.
Yes.
So I think that's what we're seeing.
Last one, I believe, from Jazz Time Jones. Who is a player comparison for Cooper Flagg? I have a few for this. I feel like a baseline would be like a Jaden McDaniels, although I feel like he's more talented with the ball in his hands than Jaden McDaniels is.
I like that.
Like a middle of the pack comparison, or not middle of the pack, but up a level from that would be Paolo Banchero, another Duke guy. And then I'd say best case scenario is like Scottie Pippen, like more talented defensively than offensively.
Yeah. That's the weird thing about Cooper and why I resist, you know what I mean? Like the Scottie Pippen one's out there, Andre Kirilenko because he's white. Like there's those things that are out there. And he's like a freakish defensive player.
Yeah.
So what's different about him, he leads Duke in points, rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks.
Yeah.
Like as a freshman. He has been everything you would hope and better. He is a better defensive player than he is offensive player. More importantly, going back to this like Keontae George conversation, he's a good enough defensive player and high enough effort player that like it changes your culture.
Yeah.
Like he comes in by himself and the culture changes that you're going to play like him because he plays so hard and because he is so impactful defensively. I don't think he's like, well, I'm so good, everyone else take the night off. I think it's the opposite. I think like everyone has to match his speed. So like that's not, I don't remember the first year of Scottie's career. Obviously I was 3 years old or whatever when he joined the Bulls, so I don't remember that. But like that's what you're hoping you get is like a guy who comes in and changes your culture defensively. Mm-hmm. And then also has a chance to be like your second best offensive player. Like I don't know if he ever averages 28 points a game, but then again, maybe he just keeps getting better. If I remember correctly, he reclassified. So he might even be young for his class. I could be wrong, but I think he did. Either way, it doesn't totally matter. That's what you're bringing him in for.
No, you're right. He turned 18 a month ago.
Yeah, right. So he's like his upside is still crazy. So yeah, while I'm not sure he's going to be LeBron offensively or Kevin Durant offensively, like he's going to be really good defensively, and then he's your best defensive player. and he does everything else too.
Yep.
So, yeah, the comps are always dangerous. I think he's truly unique, which actually I like the uniqueness of him. There's uniqueness of like, why was Bryce Sensabaugh was really unique. Well, that's why he fell at 29, because like those guys don't usually make it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a different type of unique, which is like, yeah, there's no comp for Victor Wembanyama.
Yeah.
Okay, there's no comp really for Cooper Flagg, and I'm okay betting on that at the top of this draft. So I think that's where I really like him and why I think he could have a lot of value.
All right, I think that's it.
But yeah, I'm sorry, there's not
Set in stone.
Yeah, there's like Kevin Garnett is out there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, yeah, fine. But the league doesn't play the way Kevin Garnett played when he was in the world. You know, you got to shoot better than Andre Karolinko did.
Yep.
Okay, all those things are true. So, hey, going back really quickly to like the last question we had about Svi Mikhailiuk and showcasing him. Dallas has the 32nd overall pick. I don't think they need to make that. Minnesota has the 35th overall pick. Sacramento has the 36th overall pick. New York has the 37th overall pick. Like, throw a shooter on every one of those teams, and they get better.
Yep.
A $3 million shooter. All of those teams have a young player or a player on a veteran minimum that they could trade to the Jazz to, like, get that player back that would help them in the playoffs. Like, Dallas doesn't need, I think it's Marcus Morris is on their team. Like, fine, the Jazz take him and buy him out. Minnesota's missing Dante DiVincenzo. Like, if that injury extends, well, Svi Mikhailiuk steps into that role, not perfectly, but somewhat similarly and does some of those same things. Sacramento needs to get a little bit better to try and make the playoffs. You could add another shooter there. New York could always add another shooter. They just lost DiVincenzo in the trade. So, like, yeah, give up your whatever crappy $3 million player and get Svi back. Like, and throw in your second round pick. Those all make sense to me and why I think the Jazz are showcasing him and why he probably gets moved.
And that's the thing. He'll probably play 10, 12 minutes max, maybe 8 to 10 minutes.
Yeah, he doesn't play every game.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, San Antonio has 3 picks in the top between 33 and 40. Like, if they wanted to make a push and thought, like, floor spacing would help us, I don't think they will, but so they don't want to make all those picks. So maybe they give one up, you know, and the Jazz say, yeah, we'll take a pick in the 30s for Svi Mikhailiuk that we signed off of the scrap heap for basically nothing. And that's honestly just good GM work. Yeah, that's what you got to do to keep your assets alive. All right, that'll do it for this episode of the Jazz Notes podcast. Appreciate everybody who tuned in. Find us on Twitter and Blue Sky at Ben's Hoops and C Holt Sports. We'll be back with you next week.